I have what I think are very important ideas to um, just barely touch on today, but there's a relevant point. There was a relevant question on YouTube that I think I can more adequately address through video. Um, it's really early. I feel like I look like I got hit in the face with a plank or something. And I know what you're thinking. Well, you always look that way. Um, I had I have a pen pal who was recently afflicted with an autoimmune reaction disease. I don't know what to call it, but as a result, her face is paralyzed, and she's going to be like that for a couple months, according to the doctors. And my, my response to this, I knew she was in the hospital. I was really happy to hear she was out, but my response was probably not what any normal person would appreciate. Um, I said, there's a lot of ladies your age that would pay a lot of money for that. And who inject all kinds of poison in their face to get it paralyzed. And I guess one reason we're still PayPals is she thought that was funny. Which is an unrelated note. I guess we're going to turn this into some carpet bombing of truth. Um, you may not know this is a very, very big deal. So I'll just throw it out there, and maybe you can, if it catches your fancy, you can look up some scriptures on it. I will return to this topic in greater detail, but there is uh, there's there's a set of ideas that you could summarize under the heading of hierarchical judgment. Judgment, incidentally, our minds immediately assume that means punishment, but judgment is not punishment. It's the how could you phrase this at 2 a.m.? It's the resolution of God's justice either way. It's the full resolution of God's justice. So, one scriptural synonym for this is restoration. The word restoration, we think of that in terms of making something like it used to be, but it's most often used scripturally in the sense of whatever is required to align outcomes with the justice of God. And so if you're righteous, restoration, or we would probably say restitution in a modern sense, and then our minds swing the other way. It's like if we talk about judgment or justice, well, in a modern sense, justice probably anyway. When we say judgment, we think punishment, even though it doesn't mean punishment. It's neutral. It means both positive and negative outcomes. And then when we say restitution, we always think that's going to end up in someone's favor. Like if a dog eats my sheep and I get restitution, I will have another sheep, or the money, the market value of the sheep. Anyway, so with hierarchical judgment, what I mean by that is that this network of people that we have in God's kingdom, when the dust is settled, in the end, everyone will get what they deserve. That's God's justice. And there are delays programmed into the system for God's purposes. One of the critical reasons for that is to create the opportunity for faith. So it's kind of like creation. If creation were a layout program, basically creation kicks off this process where we turn on the edit and we can move things around on the screen, and then at least by the time the final judgment occurs, but in many cases much of this occurs before then, there's a snap to grid button, and you turn off the edit and everything snaps to the grid of God's justice. I'm just throwing all this out here as if it's no big deal, but I need to say it's an extraordinarily big deal. Not just that these things happen, but I'm well aware that the common understanding does not approach anything close to what I'm saying just fluidly here. Maybe not fluently, but fluidly. So the concept of hierarchical judgment is that it's the answer to the riddle of why the Father judges no one. He gives all judgment to the Son. And Jesus says he does not judge people. And so this leaves you thinking, huh? So we talk all about the final judgment, but no one talks about who does the judging. So he says that he will come back with his angels in glory to judge the world. That's a scripture. And each of those components is critical. If he's not doing the judging, who else could do it? Well, the options are the people with him and his glory. And that's your answer. So, he tells the 12 that they'll sit on thrones and judge the tribes of Israel. But they're not the only judges. There's a cascading network of judges. And in the end, I'll just give you the answer to the riddle. You will be judged by the composite of the qualities of Christ in the people you know who are most like him. So he is the judge because it's his qualities against which you will be measured. But the quantity of those qualities will be limited to the best you knew. And that is a wonderful, wonderful blessing. So, having given you those treasures so freely, there are other there are many more things to talk about in that line of topics, but the reason I jumped on this video actually was not about that. So I wanted to talk about the question is, where do you find your Greek translations? Because I had said something in the video, the John 9 video that I did. I was talking about a sense of ashamed, the word, and in Greek, so the English translation uses the word ashamed, but if you go back to the Greek, you could come up with a better definition in at least some usages. It would probably be more natural in our modern language to say unpleasantly disappointed, or just disappointed, because that's never a good thing. So to expect something different than what you get, and to have expected better than what you get. And the person, so this is, for example, when we read about people who eat of the fruit of the tree of life, some of them obviously are filled with joy, but some are ashamed. That's the word that's used. And it's interesting. Well, first, just to indicate, I'm aware of the fact that in the Book of Mormon reference to that story, obviously that was not written in Greek. So sometimes, to gloss over this and make it a little simpler, I just say the ancient languages, and we can broad brush once we say that. But what happens is when they eat the fruit, they realize that it's not what they thought it was going to be. I've told you many times that heaven is an acquired taste. If you came into the presence of God in glory, if you haven't been there yet, I guarantee you it's not going to be what you expect. In a sense, all of creation is a process to prepare you for that, more than you are now. And it's a fallacy to say to go back to God. I know that that's a thing that a lot of people say, that when everything's over, we're going to go back to the Father. That's false on multiple levels. In John 10:10, we read that the reason Jesus did all of this for us is so that we could not just have life, or whatever we had before, but have life more abundantly, or have more of whatever was good about what we had before. One of the chief things that changes is, in an ideal case, this is the purpose for which we're born, is that we are able to perceive, receive, and value more of God's goodness than we could before. And a simplified representation for that is that we can come closer to his presence than we could before. And it isn't just a sense of distance, but that's a simplified way of thinking about it. In a not too distant analogy, you could think of this as, suppose you never knew your father because he died before you were born, but in life you decided to take a path very similar to his. And so let's say you knew him, but he died when you were 7 or 6. And your mother told you all about how he was and what he decided to do as an occupation and how many kids he had and where he grew up and all these other things, and you modeled your whole life after that. So let's say that you die and you meet him when you're an old man. I guess you wouldn't have to be an old man, but as old as he was when he died. And you meet, however you meet. The question is, how much more do you know him than you did when you were 7 or 6 and he died? That's kind of like what we're at here. It's not a very distant analogy from what we're at here. This really is turning into a carpet bomb of truth video. Anyway, when it comes to, before we get back to this Greek thing, I was supposed to say this, and I forgot, with the paralyzed face lady. So I went into the hierarchical judgment thing. In very similar ways, there's a concept of hierarchical consolation. Boy, is this important. So I have found that when I go to God for support, which I don't actually have to do anymore for some time now, and that should really trigger your curiosity at a minimum. But for a long time, this was something that dominated my, we'll say, prayer life, to use a phrase that I don't like, but that probably conveys the meaning that is appropriate here to you. For a long time, seeking God for consolation dominated my prayer life. And for a while, it kind of surprised me the way that Jesus chose to comfort me. So there were times when he would, well, there were experiences that I think would fit more closely into the expected pattern. And I've referred to this in other videos as the there, it'll be okay. But those were actually super rare. One step beyond that was he would show me things that explained why things had to be the way they were. This is an extremely powerful mechanism of consolation that God uses. This was the only consolation that Jesus had in Gethsemane. And a lot more needs to be said about that, but not here and not now. In my case, it was probably the most joyous experience I've ever had so far. That will be replaced, but for now, it probably still holds that spot. Because he showed me a time and a place, and I was there. And everything was done. And he was so happy. And he explained, to summarize, he basically put his arm around me and said, and explained, don't you see now why all this had to happen? And he was so excited for everything that we could now do together, and how I could see and understand him now. That the level of intimacy is the word I'd use, but I'm at a loss to explain that. But that we could be one in a way that would not be possible otherwise. And I really don't like the way I'm phrasing this. I wish I had better words, but that I could be a greater part of that I could experience a greater portion of his experience to get that, so that the gift that I would receive through all of this is the ability to see more and feel more of him. And he was so happy about that. It's just unbelievable. And it was 100% because of what now he could give, and that I could perceive and receive and value. And when that vision ended, man, woof, that was hard. I don't know if you've ever gone through chronic pain, and maybe you have the rare blessing of a deep sleep, and the brain signals cut off for a brief moment, and you wake up, and it's almost like there's a split-second delay between, like, the sleep carries the dulling of the pain signal just a little further than your consciousness, and then it all connects again. I don't know if you've had that experience, but if you multiply that by like 1 trillion, I was once again a fish out of water, and it all just came right back in, because I wasn't asleep. This was a waking vision. And, to say my soul longed to be there is the greatest understatement of all time. So sometimes the comfort comes in things like that. But I'll tell you, most often, the comfort comes in the form of him showing me he's been through worse. And that was surprising to see, because it's a duality that I find very interesting. On the one hand, I cannot imagine that being comforting to anybody. On the other, it was exactly right for me at the time. And so I've shared this before, but on one of these occasions, so I guess there's a theme here, but on one of these occasions, he showed me his hands, and on another occasion, that I need to back up because it's not fair to just say that. I was praying and just laying out my soul, and I was praying. I was crouched down, and I was actually using this little footstool I have in this room for this purpose. I saw his hands. He stooped down in front of me, and I saw his hands. And then he said something that indicated that that the nails that he suffered in life, that we were bound together through that. And so, it was surprising because in that moment, all the pain and the suffering that I was feeling, somehow I felt strength that was stronger than that. But it didn't take any of it away. And then on another occasion, I just, all the pain and suffering that I felt at that moment was instantly overcome. It didn't go away. It was overcome with my astonishment that the creator of all that we know would stoop down to me. I was still lower than him in the orientation of things, but the fact that he would do that just seemed so astonishing to me at the time. Since then, he's taught me and showed me so much related to this that, I now realize that's exactly what he would do. And we think of something like that as an exception to his glory. No. It's exactly his glory. If it were up to him, he'd stoop down all the time. You say, well, he's God. What's the limit there? We are. He can't do things that will overtly harm us. And we are so jacked up in how we respond to things that he is significantly impeded in the good he would otherwise do for us. To bless the word, to bless, it means you have to know which of the two parties you're talking about, the one giving or the one receiving, because the definition changes, but the common theme is kneeling down. If it's the person blessing, the meaning is to stoop down, to give someone something they could not otherwise have, that you have. And if it's the one receiving, it's to kneel down like a servant kneels down to his master, or a subject to a king. And, so the giver is like he's reaching down from a higher rung to lift you up to where he is. But in order to receive that, you have to subject yourself to the process of receipt. And realize how valuable that is. So it's exactly what he would do. The last story I want to share about this is another time, same scenario, just overcome with suffering. And I was praying for a normal consolation, there, everything's going to be okay. And instead what I saw was, I saw my hand on the vertical of a cross. We were on the ground. You'll see. I was on the ground, and I saw my hand against the upright board of a cross, beam of a cross. And just as someone's hand with a nail went to put that on me, to hammer it in, I saw his hand. And it slid right between us, between my hand and the nail. And with every blow, I felt all the pain of that nail going through my hand. But he felt it first. And it was worse for him. When that vision ended, the pain did not go away, but any desire to complain about it did. And in fact, I'm not sure I've ever prayed again about pain. I'm not sure I have. So, I'm not convinced that there are many situations where these kinds of things would be a consolation to others. And maybe I'm wrong. But I think most people just want a there, it'll be okay. I remember, and so this is why we have hierarchical consolation, because the more like God someone is, the less capable they will be of consoling one who is not. The role of an angel is to relay as much about and from God as a person is willing to receive. And so for any for whom a fullness of God would not provide the fullest consolation, the greatest gift he can give is to send someone lesser. Which sounds like a ripoff, but it's actually a tremendous blessing. Let me give you, because God himself is not normally going to say, there, it will be okay. So he's going to say something like, "Oh, you're hurting? Go feed my sheep. Oh, you're suffering? I went through worse." And to some, that will, it might boggle your mind. To some, that is the greatest thing they could hear. I remember once I was watching some video from Jordan Peterson. I think it was the one where it's a classroom video where he's talking through that book on the baby dragon that grows. Of course, it's a dragon, with Peterson. It's such a good video. And that changed some things in my mind. And one of my sons came to me, and he had a nightmare, and he was little. And he said, he described that. I said, "Tell me about it." And he's being attacked by something. I can't even remember. And I listened, and I just confidently said, "Well, why don't you attack back?" And I said, without taking a moment's pause, I just said, "You, next time you have that dream, you get a sword and you chase that thing down." And I said, "You make him scared of you, because you have the power to do that." And I'll never forget the look in this kid's eyes. And something had changed. And it was just like a curtain had been pulled back, and he saw, and he was full of confidence. And that kid never came back after that. Not once. He never came back with a nightmare. And sometimes the greatest now we're talking about confidence and not consolation, but sometimes the greatest confidence, what do I mean by some? For some people, and I'd say the people most like God, this is a godly attribute. The greatest confidence is meeting someone much better than you, who tells you, "You can do this." There was a very long time in my life where I had two mantras. And both of them had special meaning for me because of experiences I had had from God. And some of those experiences relevant to one of them, I've shared in this video, but not all of them. One of those mantras was Jesus on the cross. And anytime I was going through something that was hard because of suffering, that's something that I'd repeat in my mind. And it would give me strength. And to the degree possible, under the circumstances, peace. The circumstances were my limitations, incidentally, not any lack of peace that you feel is never about the situation. Newsflash. There is nothing in this life that is strong enough to overcome the peace that God provides. It's just that you don't have that yet. And you don't have that yet because you've not received it. But that's 100% on you, not him. That's like a radio station that's always playing. And there's no place where it won't reach. If you live in anywhere but the boonies, I don't think anyone actually listens to the radio anymore. But if you do, you probably get a whole bunch of stations wherever you are. Not where I live. There's no radio stations here. You have to drive for a little bit to pick them up. And what's more, the truck I have, it doesn't have an antenna, which is weird. Anyway, so it's especially bad. There's radio silence in my truck. I say it's bad. It's actually good. I don't care, but I don't listen to the radio. But I couldn't even if I tried. But the peace of God, it's like a radio station that's always playing. But if you don't have an antenna, you're not going to pick it up. And if your radio is not dialed into the right frequency, you're not going to pick it up. And if it's a little off, in the age of digital radios, the younger folks aren't going to get this, but there used to be a knob on there, and it was an analog process. It was manual. You had to tune to that frequency. And you could sit there and tweak it just by a little, and it would be clearer or less clear. And that's how the peace of God is. But anyway, so this mantra helped me through the development phase there. And then you get to the point where you don't need that anymore. It's not that the information's not necessary, it's just that immersion in a process will either destroy you or imprint upon you permanently anything that wasn't there before. That is a very important idea. So that was one mantra. The other one was just give me a second. Sometimes when the Lord speaks to me, he uses the vocabulary of the scriptures, and that's always nice. It's one reason why it's so important to know that vocabulary, to have scriptures, I won't say memorized, but familiarized. Of course, it's a two-edged sword, as are all things with language, because when you learn a phrase or a word, it opens to you new ideas, but all of those ideas are limited. And so embedded within that is, just like our mortal bodies, is the seed of death. Because the same meanings that identify a broader horizon, they have a horizon, right? They have a limit. And as you approach that limit, the tendency is to stay there. You'll see this. This is a human problem across all domains, that, suppose someone moves somewhere for a job and everything's great and everything's way better than it used to be. Well, that imposes now a new barrier, which is that you'll be less willing to do something else because you now have all that benefit of the new place, which you will have to leave to go somewhere else. Now, if you're smart, what you're developing, and this, I promise, this is actually super related to where we started and where we'll end up, which is on this Greek translation question. If you're smart, what you're developing is not just the next thing. It's not like I grew up in Maryland and all my family, all my friends were there their whole lives, their parents, their grandparents. Everyone was very rooted there. I think I had relatives that had been in Western Maryland since it was a state kind of a thing. Probably living in the same shack the whole time. But some real hillbillies on that one branch of the family. in the truest sense of the word, self-proclaimed. Anyway, when I moved for the first time out of the state, I was relatively young, and everyone thought I was crazy. It was almost like I was, leaving a family faith or something, and everyone was quite upset with me. But the move was instantly a good idea, and all these benefits just came rolling in. But with that was the seed of, if I responded to that like a normal person, all those good things would be things I'd have to turn away from to move again. But that's not how I roll. And so I was developing this model of, well, geez, if moving to one state is good, moving to another must be even better, right? Because all the positive change, if you abstract it out from the details, it's just like, well, this is just a generic example of how good change can be. And I would distinguish the normal reaction and that reaction as a matter of faith, right? And if you've read Through Faith, the book I wrote, you might be familiar with my definition and how it's very different than what other people believe. So this idea of developing a higher model, it's really important. Back to scriptural language. So the other mantra was, and I'll tell you, this is very interesting. I will go into details here that are meta level, that might not matter to anyone, but it will probably matter to someone. If not today, then eventually. There are discussions of foreheads in the scriptures, and they're very important. And if you look up that word, you'll find that the meaning is much more than this right here. You could derive senses of what people think, what their beliefs are, what they feel, and why. It's much more than just this body part. And this is a great and tremendously valuable mystery that you now have everything you need to fully understand. So without going into that anymore, two references in particular to foreheads in the scriptures in the Old Testament. Foreheads and faces. A face is slightly different than a forehead. Well, obviously, right? One's a subcomponent of the other in the literal English sense, but a face means much more than this as well. Anyway, so the one scripture refers to a face like a flint, and the other scripture refers to a forehead like an adamant. And it's really interesting because the Lord told me both of these things about myself. And both of those conversations actually occurred when I was praying for consolation on more than one occasion. And this was even earlier than the other ones I've told you about. And so an early mantra, which stuck with me for a long time, was face like a flint. And I think one reason for that is it's much easier to say than face like an adamant, but not that I was saying anything. The meaning of these things, as they're used in the scriptures, these phrases, is the Lord speaking to one of his prophets, I believe it was Ezekiel, and he says, I'm sending you to a very hard people, and they're not going to listen to you, but I've made your forehead harder than diamond. That's what an adamant is. And he was telling them this was kind of a variation on the theme of no weapon built against you will prosper. He's basically saying, you know, the game is rock, paper, scissors, and I'm going to give you a fourth move that beats all three others. And or in Isaiah where someone is recorded to say, who is my enemy? Let us contend. He's basically calling people out, and he's saying, bring it. Because the power of the Lord overcomes all else. And in that case, he's talking about ideological contention, at least at one level. And the Lord's reasoning does, in fact, defeat all other reasoning. And those of you who have taken up his challenge to reason with him face to face, as one man does with another, know this. It's a battle you will never win. And you would wish for nothing else. If your heart's in the right place, it's the best thing in the world to get taken behind the woodshed and dusted off by God through reason. It's a wonderful thing. Anyway, face like a flint. I've invited people on this channel before to look up videos on flint napping. It's a really important thing to understand. So, flint is a brittle rock, and you can flake it relatively easy. I mean, it's an extremely refined skill to be able to do. So they made arrowheads and spearheads with this. The reason is because it's got these properties that are rare, where it's easy to chip it. You can learn how to do it in a roughly predictable way, because it's an awful lot of work to make one of these, even for someone who's an expert at it and can do it as fast as it can be done. But if you know what you're doing, you can actually produce an edge that's sharper than a razor blade. And they would use these knives for circumcision, for example, flint knives. So, what does it mean to have a face like flint? Well, it means that you are pliable and teachable, that the Lord can shape you into what he needs you to be. And how does he do that? If you watch the flint napping video, he hits you again and again and again. And the initial hits that render you from a large piece of rock into the shape you need to be, or the size you need to be formed into what he's making, those are big blows with a big hammer. And then there's a successive process to shape the edge. And basically the hammer size reduces and the number of blows increases until it's a relatively constant process. And then one day it's done. So, flint napping is a completely reductive process that you're just taking away. And this is where the analogy is limited, because every single time God cuts something out of you, he always replaces it with something better. And so there's no such thing as loss with God. There's only improvement. There's only improvement. So that mantra helped me because it helped me more correctly interpret the experiences that we are all called to go through in life. Although most of us turn away from the hammer. It's interesting to see people go through the first big blow and almost never do it well. And not that that could ever be done gracefully, but we get so little out of it. And it's so sad because you can't escape the cost, but you can choose to reject the benefit. And part of the benefit is a subsequent blow. But, of course, there are more positive, more overtly positive benefits as well. So, anyway, as far as the forehead, like harder than an adamant, I have been wanting to tell you a story for quite some time, and now is probably as good a time as we'll get. I was a missionary for 2 years in Chile, and in that organization, there's something at the time, something like 200 missionaries in this group, and the man that was in charge of supervising us, one of his duties was to place newly arrived missionaries with a partner who could best help train them and orient them for success. So I was in a partnership with a slightly more seasoned missionary than that, but a tremendously good man. The opportunities in my life where I don't feel like every single thing around me is pulling out of me, those are few and far between. And it has been that way my whole life, as early as I can remember. Because it was ubiquitous, I didn't notice, because I didn't know anything different. But I started to realize that as I got older. So as a missionary, that was really difficult because under the constraints of that program, there wasn't a time ever where I could recharge my spiritual batteries. And so it was just like running a cordless drill for 2 years straight. And at the end, it was probably pretty pathetic. But with this gentleman, Diego Llanos, from Argentina, I was having a very enjoyable time. It wasn't that the challenges weren't there, but there was a flow of spirit in the work we were doing that was more than what I would have been able to experience or produce myself. And that was a rare thing. And so a little bit into that period of time, I got called into the office of this mission president. And we had received, I think, 2 missionaries who were, I don't remember the details of why they were reassigned from a different mission or whatever, but they had come off cycle. That wasn't the normal time for these transfers. And the mission president sat me down and he said, "Look, I'm just going to give it to you straight. This guy is a real troublemaker. And as I look out on I don't remember if we had exactly 200. It was somewhere around 200 missionaries. And so he said, whatever the number was, because he knew how many he had. But he said, as I look out across the faces of these and he said this, the faces of these 200 missionaries, I see a pair of tire tracks on every single one except you. And however he said this exactly, it was very clear to me what he meant, and my heart just sunk, because he was telling me, this guy is not going to be a pleasant person to be around, and I need you to break him down, and I know you're the only one who can deal with him. So have fun. And he was so apologetic about it, because he knew I was all about doing what I was doing there. And we were in a place that had a lot of theft, a lot. And we were all on foot. And typically we had areas we were in charge of that were quite large. And so it was difficult to get around. And for various reasons, we just didn't have any money for travel. And so basically you just walked, 10 or 16 hours a day, every day, to get to the various places you needed to go. And one of the areas I was transferred to, and I'm telling this story to give you an example of evidence for which my belief that he understood what I was all about is true. One of the areas I was transferred to, we had quite a few people that we were responsible for visiting, and the reason for this is because we had exceeded expectations in the number of people we found to teach. And so we were writing letters weekly to this mission president to give him a report on how things are going. And in my letter, I said, look, here are the number of people we're visiting. And as of right now, because we have to walk to all these places, I have no way of fitting more visits into our schedule. And so this is like, and I'm sorry for the analogy, but this is like a salesperson telling his supervisor, I'm leading the company in sales, and I could do more, but I'm spending most of my time walking. And so I said, you have three choices. One, our numbers are going to stay the same. Two, our numbers can go up, but you're going to have to give me money to take a bus. Or three, you need to give us bikes. And I believe it was less than 24 hours after that, his assistants showed up at our door, and we did not live close to his office where they were stationed, I guess, with two brand new bikes. And all the other missionaries were really, really, really jealous. And they, the question was, why does Elder Smith get bikes and we don't? And the answer was, if you get the numbers that Elder Smith gets, you'll get bikes too. So, anyway, so the mission president was apologetic in assigning me this missionary, and his prophecy proved true. So, that's your forehead like an adamant. A thing must be what it is, and aletheia, truth, is what cannot remain hidden. And we're veiled in tabernacles of obfuscating flesh. Maybe that's a word that's not familiar to you. You should look it up, obfuscate. It means to intentionally hide something. But certain things cannot be veiled, and nothing can remain veiled that is true. And there are emissions that show who and what we really are, and nothing can stop that. And now finally we get to Greek. So somebody asked me once, why do you use different translations for different verses? How do you select those? I use scriptures to build a model of the truth, and I use my model of the truth to teach. So there's a name, and I can't remember what it is. It's not proof texting. That's something slightly different. But Bible scholars have a name for choosing a verse in a translation that fits what you want to say, and they see it as a bad thing. It reminds me of, in my professional life, at least for the last 15 years or so, geez, it's been longer than that, yikes, almost 20 years. I don't know how that's possible. Anyway, I've been working in algorithms and software for mass spectrometry data analysis, which is a mouthful. And one of the challenges there is that algorithms have parameters, which are like knobs that change the way a program works. Just to give you a simple little, not definition, but a simplified summary. And so you change the knobs, you get different answers. And in regulated pharmaceutical spaces, you're not allowed to do that. And so if the name of the game is separating signal from noise, which is basically just recognizing shapes in graphs, so don't think of it as anything super fancy, although it's pretty tricky. If the name of the game is recognizing shapes in graphs, then sometimes, an algorithm will do really well on some shapes in one particular graph, but very poorly in others. And so it's extraordinarily difficult to write an algorithm that will perform well on all shapes across one graph, let alone all shapes on all graphs. And so in practice, what happens is you need to set the knobs differently to get a good answer. And that is true across one graph. It's certainly true across multiple graphs. In a regulated space, the FDA does not allow you to touch the knobs. You get to touch them once, and then you have to leave them alone for that whole experiment. So that's a huge frustration of people we try to help professionally. And so it's like that where Bible scholars say you can only touch the knobs once. You choose your translation, and that's what you use. And you choose the most correct translation. And I've got news for you. There are horrifically bad mistakes in every translation I've looked at, just from a scholarly perspective. You don't even need to know anything else. There are translations that take out critical things, put in things that are not there, and misstate things all over the place. And okay, so that's a problem. So if you choose one dial setting, you're going to be wrong. And maybe it doesn't matter for your particular topic that you're teaching about today, but it's going to happen. So whatever this phrase is for choosing a particular translation based on, for a verse or passage based on what you want to say, they have a name for that, and it's considered a bad thing. But I outwardly, overtly proclaim that I am doing this because I am not citing the authority of the translators to support the truth of what I'm telling you. And all this saying that whatever I say may indeed be incorrect and incomplete. So, and that should be the assumption until proven otherwise. Through your own experience. John 7:17. So, I teach from the model I'm building. Now, to help understand what I mean by that, and it's definitely an idea that you're going to see and hear a lot more about if you stay with me here. Lately, I've had some things I'm doing with work that create windows of unpredictable amounts of time. And I'm working from home, and so, and my kids are homeschooled. So, for the last week, looking at my priority list, one thing I need to do is help my daughter. I have 2 children I'm trying to help get into or develop a toolbox of design skills. And one of those is my son, who's a bit older and able to do this on his own, and actually much faster on his own than he would be if I were sitting with him. And so he's doing that. And then I have a daughter who's younger and still developing a lot of the skills to be more independent in learning. And so to try to kickstart her on this, having given her the opportunity to do it herself and that not happening, and not for lack of desire, it's just, she's not there yet development-wise. So I've earmarked, if I have, this is going to sound ridiculously specific, if I have at least 30 minutes all of the sudden between 3 and 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, I will snag my daughter and we sit through some online classes for design. And as we're watching these, I have many objectives that are not related to design at all. So for example, helping her learn how to take notes in an outline form during a class that she cannot interrupt. She can hit pause, but she can't ask questions or anything. So I'm trying to help her develop the sense of when she needs to pause to catch up. And more than that, how to translate the monolithic information coming in into something that's more structured. And so to frame that, I told her that one of the things I want her to do as a result of this is create a slideshow that conveys everything that she's learned to someone who didn't do any of this training, because we're doing multiple classes. And the multiple classes thing is great because she has to synthesize ideas from different people, and they might be using different words. They're certainly going to be arranged differently. And she's got to fold all of that into her outline, and then she's going to make a slideshow out of the outline in addition to other things. So why do I go into this huge detail on this? I think that there are meta lessons that can be learned that are useful, like if you really want to be productive, the end state is going to be something approaching. I know what I would do with 30 minutes that I got that I did not anticipate sometime between 3 and 5 p.m. from Monday through Friday. And that sounds like a burdensome kind of level of scheduling, but it's second nature. When you get into it, you really don't have to think about it very much. It's just you have to cut your teeth on that. And on that note, yesterday I coined a phrase by combining metaphors. I'm trying to remember what it was. Sometimes the best way to cut your teeth is to bite the bullet. Something like that. I thought it was funny. Anyway, it's true. And working through these presentations with my daughter is certainly that. But we're building skills that will grow their own legs and result in greater resources, which is so important. things that are good, that are from God, they build on themselves. They open doors for the most part. There is a facet where they close doors, but they do build resources, they build strength, they build capability, they build future opportunity. The quality of future opportunity definitely increases. So even if the quantity decreases, that's where the doors get closed. As you ascend the mountain, there are fewer paths, but they're better paths. There are fewer people, but they're better people. And so there's no regret as you ascend, unless you're ashamed. Unless you were signed up for something very different than what you got. Like those of us unfortunate enough to have volunteered for the Army have learned through sad experience. Your mileage may vary. Anywho, so we're doing this design course together. And yesterday I paused the video because it's an odd thing having the gift of discernment. I probably made 10 understatements of the year in this video. So as we're watching the video, I don't know anything about design. I'm very interested in it. I have an aesthetic eye, but it's basically limited to recognizing what I don't like. So I can see when things are not beautiful, and I can appreciate when they are, but I cannot generate them. This is a weakness that I have. I have a very deep awareness of beauty, but I cannot generate it. That's a weakness that I have. And so, not anywhere near. I mean, it's galaxies apart, the two. My generative ability versus recognition ability. So, as we're watching these videos, I am buying my own product, so to speak, because I'm not taking notes. I don't need to. We're watching on 1x, so that this is like, it takes 2% of my brain power to process everything that these videos have to offer. And it's fun too, seeing what the rest of the world experiences at college, because I'm sorry, I don't want to denigrate design or designers or anything, but I think this content could be radically concentrated, and it would have to be to compare in any way to the rigor of the kinds of courses I had to take to get my degrees, but whatever. So, beyond thinking like, this is why the world is what it is, that's probably like 3% of my brain as I'm watching these videos. But part of my brain, or whatever it is scanning what my daughter is thinking as she's hearing these things and feeling. And that's probably a really weird thing to hear, but whatever. It is what it is. If you have discernment, you know what I'm talking about. Spiritual discernment. And the other thing is, I'm building a model of, here's what this teacher is saying. And here's what they're showing. And then I'm working up here, building this transcendent model of design. And I'm asking questions that this teacher is not directly thinking of or addressing. And I'm interrogating what he's saying, and both the classes we've watched have been he's. Which I'm surprised by, because in my experience, women tend to be much more talented in this than men, but I don't know why the two classes we've watched so far have been men. We'll see if that pattern continues. That's a curiosity. The pictures that he's showing, because there's a lot of examples, which is great, in this, I'm actively interrogating those. And I'm building this transcendent model of what is design. And in my head, what I'm doing is I'm writing a book or building a class to teach others. And I'm restructuring everything that comes in the best way I can. Super subjective, right? But that's the process. And all of a sudden, I realized that my daughter, of course, is not doing any of this, although she's doing a wonderful job rising to the challenge of writing an outline of these things. So, every once in a while I pause it and I say, you should have a heading that says color, and these should be your sub-bullets. What do you have? Or tell me what you just wrote, and how did you summarize this? And we do quick feedback. Feedback is the most important part of teaching, by the way, which is we don't really have any here. The comments is the best we've got. And this is one reason why interactions grow towards physical gathering, because you need feedback. There's so much more to say about that, but so the feedback is what to prioritize on. And when you're working with your kids on anything, always remember that whatever you're doing is less important than the meta level exchange that's going on. It's always true. And not just with kids. When you're interacting with God or anyone else, this is also true. It's not the thing. So you're drawn into the interaction through what you want right now and the value you see right now. Well, guess what? What you want is way less than what's best. Even if you're fully reconciled to your best understanding of what's good and all that, we're all just still constantly coming up higher. And what you perceive is incorrect or incomplete. And what the experience or person or whatever, what it actually has to give is so much more than that. But God works through our limitations, and his objective is to give us the greatest good he can, the greatest good that we're willing to receive. So this is critical. So I told my daughter, I paused it at one point and I said, so your task here, what do you think it is? And she basically said to write down what this guy says. And I was like, yeah, that's good, but let's take that a little higher. I said, I know you don't understand anything about modeling and what that means, but let me help you understand by telling you what I'm doing as I'm listening to this. Because he said something, the teacher, and I saw that it actually was better reframed in this, transcendental way, and it tied into all these themes we're seeing all along. And that was one example. And I said, so I would frame it this way. And she was like, oh, yeah. And then at another opportunity, he said he defined design. And that's obviously a subjective thing. And I paused it. I said to my daughter, what does design mean? And that test was multifaceted because, one, I wanted to see if she had caught that he had given a definition. She had not. She gave her definition, which was another intent for me to see. And then I said, okay. And then I pointed out that he had defined it so that she should write that definition down, and that also she should continue developing her own, because I wasn't very satisfied with his answer. And, she shouldn't be either. There's a better answer out there. So she said design was to make things pretty. He said design solves the problem, and he was framing it more as an information, the challenge of communicating information, which I thought was interesting and very useful. So At a meta level, one thing that's very interesting about these design courses is it becomes clear to me, and I've already put my cards on the table as to why I might think this way. It becomes clear to me that the mystery of design is the mapping between what we think looks good and why. And that why is the big mystery. And so people have theories and they try to present rules. And of course, there are principles. And it's interesting, designers I've talked to and I've talked to at least 3 people who are really good at this. 4. I've made a note to talk to people who are really good about this, good with this, because I'm not. It's a mystery to me, but I highly value it. And they always recite principles and even rules. Oh, this color usually means this. This color makes people feel that. When you have these shapes, you do this, and this is what, and it's going to make it look larger and whatever. Or these things are really going to clash, etc. And so they know the rules and the principles. But then I've asked several of these, actually I think I've asked all of them, how did you get good at this? Was it something you were naturally good at? Did you intentionally learn more about it? How did you practice the art? And one person said, well, I went to college for this. And I said, do you know of resources someone could get engaged with that aren't a college course? And the answer was no. And someone else is just like, I don't know, I just figured it out. Okay, can you explain it to others? No. And one person pointed me to these courses on LinkedIn, and that's what we're doing. So anyway, the model is the important thing. So when you go to the Greek translations, so when I'm reading scripture, I'm not memorizing rules. I'm using what those say to build a model. And the inputs don't just include scripture, they're everything in my life. Particularly experiences with God. And then that builds the model. And the model's always getting refined. And when I look up ancient words in Greek or Hebrew, I'm not just looking at the definitions, although I do look at those. I'm also looking at the network of references and all those scriptures and everything God has taught me about them and everything I've experienced that he calls to my remembrance as I'm doing this. And so I synthesize all of these things into a transcendent idea or network of ideas. And then once you've got that, then all of a sudden, you've heard a lot about generative AI. Generative AI. When you have a model of something that fits the evidence that you've seen, every single one of those models can be used to generate new things. This is all really important because what we're after is the realm of the spirit contains the realm of the physical. They're not separate, and it's not the other way around. The physical world is the subset. God created all things spiritually before anything got created physically. Spirit is not bounded by words. It's beyond that. And this is why I struggle so badly in speaking, because I'm much more fluent. My mother tongue is spirit. And this is not something I'm alone in, and you can see examples of this in the scriptures as well, but there are also people alive who are like this. So there are richer vocabularies than human words. This is one major reason why Jesus taught so frequently with parables. It wasn't just to teach to multiple layers of people at the same time, that it was a reason, but that reason is a side effect of the main reason. And that's because, so words are much more narrow in how many layers they have, although as this extremely long now discussion has highlighted, words do have many layers, or they can have many layers. And the ancient words more typically have more layers than modern words, because language tends to reduce over time, not expand. We think it expands. The Oxford Dictionary expands, but it becomes more specific over time. And so we have more words with less meaning. That's a good metaphor for life as well, but whatever. We have much more activity with far less meaning, but very specific meaning. The realm of the spirit is not bounded in this way. And so part of our duty as beings created in the image of God is to take part in the creative process. And I mean like capital C creation, like the creation, this ongoing process from alpha to omega, the beginning to the end. And the way we do this is, we've said this phrase, make things on earth more like they are in heaven. An analog to that is bring into the physical world the things that only exist in the spirit. And this is a major, major idea. And most people only use their faculties, their heart, might, mind, strength, etc., in the physical world. Jesus even made a comment about this, speaking specifically of common sense and reasoning, which religious people seem to be completely devoid of, whereas they exercise it openly in their temporal lives. They put up a wall and say these tools do not pass this barrier, and they don't use reasoning when it comes to spiritual things, and that is a crime of the highest order, a travesty of the most major kind, because the spirit is the natural domain of reason. It's as if, what it's like is back in the 1800s or whenever, they had all these people who were allegedly raised by monkeys or wolves or whatever. It was a theme, maybe a meme, more correct to say. And, the story of Tarzan. This is like Tarzan getting back to the jungle. When you develop your faculties of reason and you unleash them in the spirit, it's like Tarzan getting back to the jungle. And, everyone thought he was this proper lord guy from England, nobleman. And then he gets back into the jungle, and the guy can talk with apes and defeat lions with his bare hands and stuff and swing from trees. That's his natural environment. And he can do these tremendous things. In the world of men, he's a lord and a noble, but in the jungle, he's the king. And that's when you unleash reason in the realm of spirit, you would not believe what is possible. Because then you can turn around and use that to create things in the physical. Literally, this is how Jesus healed people. That's going to sound very mysterious, but I promise you will see it's as mechanical as a clock ticking. When you know how it all works, the mechanisms are so plain. Okay, well that's a very long answer to a very short question, but I hope that amongst this carpet bomb of truth, you found more than a few things to think about, and that keeps you busy until 5 minutes from now when I release the next video, or however many minutes it might be. Take care.